Gavin Esler.
Shock therapy, the massive interest rate cut, bold about time or just a sign of panic? Tonight, the Bank of England cut of 1.5% took everyone by surprise. But with the markets giving it the thumbs down, will it do the job? And if the banks do not pass on the cut, who can make them? Plus, Obama starts to pick his team.
Economic chaos is just one of the problems that President-elect Obama is going to have to deal with. Here in Chicago, he's putting together his team to govern America.
Can Labour hold another crucial seat in Scotland?
And I'll be reporting from Glenrothes, where they've been voting today in the by-election. Will the SNP give Gordon Brown another bloody nose in the constituency that's right next door to his very own?
And everybody wants to be Obama's best friend. Can any British political party really claim the honour? We ask our panel. Good evening. For weeks, small businesses, newspaper columnists, politicians and many economists have been banging on the doors of the Bank of England, demanding significant cuts in interest rates. Today, the old lady of Threadneedle Street was as racy as you can imagine, cutting rates 1.5% down to 3%, the lowest level in 50 years. But, and there always is a but, what will that mean? Does it signify a kind of panic about the economy? When the CBI asked for 1% and most analysts thought it would be 0.75%, should the bank have acted sooner, as the Fed did? And if the banks don't pass on the cut, is there a stick with which the government should beat them? Here's our economics editor, Paul Mason.
It's the sharpest cut since 1991 and the lowest interest rate since 1955. You might add the largest piece of humble pie ever ingested by the Bank of England, because this is a U-turn, and it means several things.
Here's the first thing the interest rate decision tells us: that the economy is in much worse shape than policymakers thought it was.
This, on any view, is one of the most substantial reductions in interest rates that we've seen for many, many years. And it's been done to reflect the fact that our economy, like every other economy in the world, is going through a very difficult time. I want to ensure that banks pass the benefit on to people and to businesses in this country. And I will do everything I can to ensure that that happens, as well as supporting the wider economy.
2 months ago, the bank was still worried about inflation. This cut means they think growth could fall so sharply that we get deflation. Certainly, there's a lot of gloomy data around. Car sales figures have fallen for 6 months in a row, 23% down last month on a year ago. Manufacturing output, already in technical recession, is 1.3% down in the last 3 months. House prices were down 2.2% last month and are now 14% down year on year. The last time interest rates were this low, Harold Macmillan was Chancellor, and we were about to enter the never had it so good era. This time, the fear is we may soon never have had it so bad. According to the Bank of England, business surveys and reports by regional agents point to continued severe contraction in the near term.
The second thing this rate cut tells us is that the banking system is still not working properly. Just to achieve a bit of an interest rate cut for consumers, they had to give the banks a massive one.
If the cut is passed on in full, anybody on a £150,000 mortgage would see the average monthly payment fall by £138. But banks have been refusing to pass on cuts. Halifax today withdrew its tracker mortgages, leaving HSBC as the only major lender with a tracker on the market. Lloyds TSB and Cheltenham and Gloucester were the only lenders to pass the cut on immediately. And why is that? Well, here's how the banking industry puts it.
The actual price is dependent not on the Bank of England rate directly, but on the wholesale market. You can't just change a problem with a global financial system or a problem between what banks want to lend and what there is available to lend just by a few fine words.
The point about this financial crisis is that it's been big and it's happened fast, faster than any previous crisis anybody can remember.
The third thing this does is raise a question. Has the bank's decision-making been behind the curve? We now know output fell sharply in the third quarter of this year, but that was July, August, September, all months in which the Bank of England refused to cut interest rates.
Well, I think it's a recognition on the part of the Bank of England that the economic and financial difficulties facing the UK economy are significant and much more serious than they previously judged. There was a general view that the bank was behind the curve. It hadn't done enough to loosen monetary policy, so I think they were responding to those concerns, and by acting very decisively, implementing a much bigger rate cut than anybody really expected, they've sent a clear signal that they are determined to act.
There's one final problem. Inflation targeting was designed at a time when politicians thought we'd seen an end to boom and bust. But now we've got bust, and it's happening fast. Can the policy mechanisms move fast enough to stop it?
Bank of England watchers will note that this decision came only after Alistair Darling gave the bank a big nudge, saying that its inflation target could be interpreted over a longer timescale. And now he's giving the high street banks a bit of a nudge.
This is the time when banks need to play their part. The public has helped the banking system through its difficulties in the past few weeks. They now have to help their customers, individuals and businesses.
The Bank of England's move today is massive, but, say its critics, late. The question now is whether this rapid cash injection can fuel a bounce back and prevent a long year of economic gloom.
And Paul is with me now. This is really amazing stuff, Paul. But does it mean that we shouldn't worry so much about inflation?
Well, the data is telling them that come the new year, inflation just will not be a problem. We could be looking at below target inflation, that's below 2%, possibly, in the worst case scenario, deflation or 0% inflation. And deflation, of course, let's remind ourselves, is what pushes recessions into slumps. Now, the IMF has said today that the UK economy will shrink by 1.3% next year. That's the worst performance of any developed country. The problem for the Bank of England is some of this data it is acting on, it already knew about. It knew about it from its anecdotal evidence, from its agents, from the data it was working with. And the question has to be asked, if we end up with the worst recession in the developed world, was that because the monetary authorities did not act fast enough?
One of the things that happens in a normal, well-ordered world is when countries cut the interest rates, the currency goes down. Is the pound under pressure?
That is the theory, Gavin.
It's the theory.
This credit crunch is defying many theories. I mean, sterling did strengthen a little bit today on the back of this, unlike the FTSE, which plummeted 5%. But let's have a look at the longer-term performance of sterling, because it's a very big factor in the economy. We've got it here. Against the dollar, that's what's happened to sterling since May. And against the euro, a vertically and virtually identical graph, down about 20% or on aggregate. Now, the thing is here is that normally, as you say, the interest rate cuts hammer currencies, but the Americans have cut interest rates, the Europeans haven't. What we're seeing here is something bigger. It's the first crisis where you've had a strong Eurozone. And one big new challenge for the Bank of England is that our currency is squashed between two strong currency blocks. And we've never really seen that in a crisis on this scale.
So, is this going to work?
Well, it'll work if it translates into extra demand in the economy. There is where the problem for the politicians lie, because the banks are not spreading the money around. Alistair Darling and the government know that they are in control of half of the banking system. They could easily do something about it. We know they are discussing what they should do about it, but the fact is, until some of this money becomes effective demand in the shops, in the hands of people, and confidence returns, it won't work. And of course, confidence was hammered by this move on the stock market today.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, for some more perspective on this, I'm joined now by Vince Cable, the Lib Dem Treasury spokesman, John McFall, Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, and Philip Hammond, Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury. John McFall, do you think the Bank of England has actually panicked in doing this?
No, I don't think it has panicked, Gavin, because this was a difficult decision. Because the Governor and MPC came before the committee the last time, the Treasury Committee. We were talking about oil being $150 a barrel and commodity prices high and food prices up 83% in 1 year. So things have changed dramatically. Was it a little bit behind the curve? Perhaps. But at the end of the day, this goes against Mervyn King's dictum when he said he wanted monetary policy to be boring. It ain't boring, and I think it's welcome today that such a steep fall in interest rates has taken place.
Vince Cable, were you surprised? I mean, with the CBI saying we'd like 1% to go with 1.5%, that was pretty surprising, wasn't it?
Well, it was surprising, but it was right. I mean, a month ago, I called for a 2% cut in interest rates, and that's what we've now had. And I think what's clearly happened is the Monetary Policy Committee have understood the gravity of the situation, and they've done what they had to do. I mean, there are the sort of longer-term problems about how this feeds through into demand, as Paul Mason's described. I think the government are now going to have to be much tougher with the banks. They've got a loose agreement with them, maintain the flow of credit at competitive rates, but it's not happening. So that's where the next intervention has got to happen. The Monetary Policy Committee have done their bit for the time being.
Philip Hammond, looking at the way the markets reacted, what was it, 5.7% fall on the FTSE, suggests that they think there's something really quite bad behind this. In other words, we're in for a very, very serious contraction. And inflation, forget about that.
Well, the size of the bank's move today suggests that the patient is very sick, and it's to some extent a recognition of that. And of course, the IMF report today showing that the UK economy, far from being well positioned to weather the storm, as Gordon Brown's been telling us for the last year, is in fact the worst positioned of all the major economies and will be hit harder than any other major economy in this recession.
Can I ask you all, beginning with John McFall, I mean, where does this leave us now? Because as you heard very clearly from Paul, I assume you all agree, unless this is passed on to small businesses, the people borrowing the money, those of us with mortgages, it won't work at all. So how do you get the banks, Mr. McFall, to pass it on?
Well, Gavin, I think we need a public conversation on this with the banks, because one thing that's been absent in the past few weeks is any chief executive of any bank on any medium talking about what they're going to do. And given the response that there's been from, say, the British Bankers Association, from Angela Knight, where she says this all depends on LIBOR, that was contradicted tonight by a representative of Barclays on Radio 4 at 10 o'clock, when he said that for small businesses, their lending is linked to the bank rate, and therefore their small business customers will get the 1.5%.
Can you compel them? I mean, is there any, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, is there a big stick? I noticed one of your colleagues, George Moody, said, legislation might be needed. I'm not sure whether you agree with that or what shape that might take, Mr. McFall.
No, I don't think legislation will be needed, because I always feel legislation is always behind the curve, that you legislate for something and then there's a new situation that you have to deal with. But what we really do need, and I think the comments of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor today have expressed frustration at the banks, we really need openness and transparency here. And certainly my committee is looking at the banking crisis, and to get the chief executives of the banks to come along and explain their strategy is really, really important. So pressure has to be put on them in that way.
Vince Cable, I know people at home will be saying, but we own some of these banks. I mean, we actually own it as people. There must be some mechanism where we can get them to pass this rate cut on, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I mean, the government has just been extraordinarily feeble. I mean, there are 2 nationalised banks. There are 4 that are partly nationalised. The government now has directors on the boards of these companies. There was an agreement that was reached and published saying that the banks would maintain lending at competitive rates, and they're not doing it. They're running rings around the government. They're making complete idiots out of them over, for example, the bonus agreements they reached to. It is a question of the Treasury and its Treasury ministers being very firm and insisting that the banks deliver on the assurances that they have given.
Where do you stand on this?
There's 2 parts to this problem. First of all, the point of recapitalising the banks and bailing them out was not just to save the banks, it was to save the economy. So it is absolutely essential that these interest rate cuts are passed on. But the other part of the equation...
how do you make them do this?
Let me explain that. The other part of the equation is that the rates at which banks are borrowing in the markets are still well above the base rate, disconnected from the base rate. When the government announced the recapitalisation package, they also announced a big package of support guarantees for interbank lending. That part of the package hasn't really been deployed yet, and I think we've got to now focus on getting that package deployed, getting the interbank market working again, so that rates to borrowers can come down. It's no good just exhorting the banks to lend at lower rates if they're still having to borrow at higher rates.
John McFall, no use just exhorting the banks. And Vince Cable was saying that they're running rings around the government and perhaps around your committee. I mean, you know, we want, or the government says it wants, lending to homeowners and small businesses at 2007 levels. We're nowhere near that.
Yeah, but Gavin, my committee just 2 or 3 weeks ago visited Japan to look at the experiences of Japan when they went through their crisis in the 1990s. A number of issues came up there. One issue was conditionality. If you're going to help the banks, you have business improvement plans. I want to see these business improvement plans published so that the public can see and have a running commentary on what the banks are going to do for the £500 billion that the taxpayer has put to stand behind the banks. Let's remember, the banks got themselves into this problem. They imploded, and it was the taxpayer that rescued them. So we must have the banks having these business improvement plans and having them out in the open.
Vince Cable?
I very much agree with that. Of course, the banks are also behaving in a very short-sighted way that is undermining their own position, because if they do precipitate recession as a result of keeping up interest rates and withholding credit, then of course the economy sinks even further. There are even more bad loans. There are even more losses in the banking system. So they're acting in a very foolish, short-sighted way. But although I've been very critical of the banks, it isn't just up to them, via lower interest rates, to help maintain demand in the economy. The government has a role. We've now got to move on beyond monetary policy to looking at fiscal policy and the role for tax cuts on middle, low-income people as a way of sustaining demand. So it isn't just a question of interest rates and the banks, though they're absolutely central.
I know the question of tax cuts can sometimes be toxic for you, but he's got a point there, hasn't he?
Well, we think that the right response to this crisis is a monetary response. That's what we've been calling for. The IMF in its report today said that a fiscal response, that is tax cuts and more borrowing, can be appropriate, but only in economies that have a strong fiscal position. And Britain's problem is that we go into this recession with an incredibly weak fiscal position, having borrowed right the way through the good years, going in with a mountain of debt.
Thank you all very much. Now, Rahm Emanuel, a tough former advisor to Bill Clinton, is Barack Obama's first White House appointment. He'll be chief of staff, effectively the gatekeeper of the new president, vetting those who will be allowed into the Oval Office. But as we've heard repeatedly, with an economic crisis and 2 foreign wars, what kind of team will the president-elect put together? Will it include Republicans? And how quickly will they get to work? David Grossman is in Chicago. David.
This is not usual. People queuing to buy a copy of yesterday's paper. The edition of the Chicago Tribune reporting Barack Obama's victory is on its way to becoming a collector's item. For these people, it's all about history, but for Barack Obama right now, it's about the future. In just 75 days' time, he has to put together a team that will take over governing the United States. It's a huge operation.
They have 11 weeks to put together the largest federalized democracy in the world. And they're under tremendous pressure to deal with a variety of crucial issues. We have the global financial crisis, the housing crisis, the credit crisis in the United States, and Senator Obama, President-elect Obama, will be managing 2 military conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq.
The transition team is being led by John Podesta, a former chief of staff in the Clinton White House, and Valerie Jarrett, a long-time advisor to President-elect Obama from right here in Chicago. Today, Senator Obama appointed Congressman Rahm Emanuel as his chief of staff. Again, he's from Chicago, currently the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, experience he'll need to draw on to make sure President Obama's legislative program gets through. It's now also being reported that Robert Gibbs will become White House press secretary, and another Chicago native, David Axelrod, who was the Obama campaign chief strategist, will now move to become President Obama's senior advisor. Like markets around the world, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is having a torrid time of it. Here they're trading financial futures. Today, prices fell heavily in expectation of bad US employment figures tomorrow. The economy was, of course, the biggest issue in the election campaign. not just here in Chicago, but right around the world, people are looking for economic leadership from President-elect Obama. In just 9 days' time, George Bush is hosting a financial summit at the White House. World leaders will be coming from all around the globe. But they don't want to hear from George Bush. They want to know what President-elect Obama has in mind. The next key appointment that Senator Obama will have to make is Treasury Secretary. Names in the frame at the moment include former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, former Fed Chair Paul Volcker, and Timothy Geithner, currently President of the New York Federal Reserve, a man who's been seen to do a pretty good job recently of stopping Wall Street exploding. Chicago trader Brian Battle says this appointment is just one of the big questions that the markets and the world still has about Barack Obama's economic plans.
They're going to want to know how much Obama can change things, and they're really, I think, looking for a signal on who it's going to be. You know, is it going to be a Republican-Democratic administration mixed together? Are they going to take Hank Paulson? Will they keep Hank Paulson? You know, do they like Ben Bernanke? You know, is Paul Volcker, one of my heroes, is Paul Volcker from the 80s going to come back and reemerge in the Obama administration? I think if Volcker comes out and says he'll take a job or an advisory job because he's been a vocal supporter of Obama, I think that would send a great signal to the world that we are in good hands.
It's inside this Chicago office block that the Obama transition team is going to work. It's also inside here that we think that President-elect Obama will get his first highest level security briefing. He'll now be told even about ongoing covert operations. After the economy, national security is his biggest challenge. Secretaries of Defense and State will be the other two key appointments. Here there's speculation that the new president may want to strike a bipartisan note, perhaps appointing a Republican who's opposed the Iraq War. If during his security briefings the president-elect should look up from his notes and gaze out of the window, he'll see the US flag at half-mast, tribute to another American soldier killed in one of the two wars the country is fighting right now. In some ways, getting elected was the easy part.
David Jonesby now from Chicago. What's been the reaction to the appointment so far, David?
Well, so far the reaction from the opposition in Washington, from the Republicans, is not very impressed with the appointment of Rahm Emanuel. He's seen as a pretty partisan figure, where they say is President Obama's pledge to reach out across the aisle. The problem that President-elect Obama has is that although he ran on the basis of changing, not being a Washington insider, if you want to fix a car, you need a mechanic. If you want to fix Washington, you need someone who knows how Washington works, and that is Rahm Emanuel. But that presents a bit of a problem with how you present your new administration, and indeed how new is it. In the last hour, we've had a statement from President-elect Obama. He says, though Rahm understands how to get things done in Washington, he still looks at the world from the perspective of his neighbours and constituents on the northwest side of Chicago. For fans of the West Wing, a bit of trivia about Rahm Emanuel. He used to be in the Clinton White House getting stuff done for Bill Clinton, and during that time he was apparently the inspiration for the character of Josh Lyman in the West Wing.
Okay, but when is President-elect Obama going off to Washington?
Well, tomorrow. He's staying here in Chicago tomorrow. He's going to meet with his transitional economic team, among them Paul Volcker and Larry Summers, both of those names connected with perhaps the job of Treasury Secretary. After that, there'll be a press conference. Monday is when we expect him to go to Washington as a guest this time, a guest at the White House, a guest of George Bush.
Thank you very much, David. Well, I'm joined now from Washington by Sidney Blumenthal, who worked in the Clinton White House, was a key advisor to Hillary Clinton, and is the author of The Strange Death of Republican America. Sidney, talk us through what you see as being the kind of priorities now for Barack Obama over the next few weeks.
Transitions are very interesting periods for presidents. You're not president. The current president actually has the full powers of the presidency until the president-elect takes the oath of office. Historically, enormous things have happened during transitions. For Abraham Lincoln, for example, the entire South seceded during this period. There were 6 months before Franklin Roosevelt took office after he was elected, and the Great Depression went on without the New Deal, even though he was elected. For Barack Obama, he has as his first priority establishing an economic program. He's going to have to take over very, very quickly. and signal to the Congress what it is that he wants to do on that. And then he has the matters of, as he said, 2 wars. He has national security matters to attend to immediately. We're going to see the kind of direction he's going to take through the appointments he's making, particularly in the cabinet. The White House staff represents the intimate circle of the president, but also how he intends to relate to the Congress. But the cabinet will reflect these larger positions that he's going to take on economics and national security.
So what's your hunch on that? I mean, for example, Bill Clinton at the start was very heavily criticised for having a cabinet of really talented people, but not spending much time on the White House staff in the first couple of years, and that made it a bit ropey. How do you see Rahm Emanuel, who does know how things work, and how do you think that will fit in?
Well, I know Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel is a friend of mine. I work very closely with him in the White House. Rahm is... has the confidence of the president-elect. He is a Chicagoan, like Obama. He comes out of Chicago politics, but he also knows the inside of the executive branch, what a White House is like, how it's supposed to operate, and he also knows the inside of the Congress. He's the 4th-ranking Democrat in the leadership there. So he brings and delivers a vast experience to Obama. He's very effective. And that, I think, is a good choice for him. But we forget that President-elect Clinton, in the beginning, had a very large economic summit. He was in a recession as well when he was elected. And he addressed this question straight on during the transition. And that established the economic program, helped to, that laid the groundwork for the great prosperity of the 1990s. We may well see something like that with President-elect Obama.
How bipartisan will he be? How bipartisan should he be? I mean, there's lots of rumours Bob Gates, for example, would be kept on as Secretary of State for Defence as a continuity figure to deal with those 2 long-running wars. I mean, why would that be important, or what signals would it send if there were 1 or 2 Republicans in the cabinet?
There are different levels and meanings of what bipartisanship means. And what it means in a campaign is different from what it means in government, particularly after an election. After this election, what it would mean in terms of naming a Republican to any position would mean a sense of national unity on certain key questions. I would say national security. But there's also the question of the Congress and how you bring the Congress along. In the House of Representatives, the Republicans are now captured by their far right wing. In the Senate, there are a small group of moderates who may hold the balance of power only when there are very, very difficult questions and the Republican minority wants to filibuster. And that Republican moderate group will determine what happens. So there are different elements involving bipartisanship as we go forward with big Democratic majorities in the Congress.
We've only got about 20 seconds left or so. I see tomorrow morning's front page of our Guardian newspaper over here suggests that maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Republican governor of California, might be co-opted as energy czar, or at least presumably looking at climate change because of his record. That would be a very interesting appointment.
His wife is a Kennedy, Maria Shriver. And Ted Kennedy and the Kennedy family were strong supporters of Obama. Let me say, there are a lot of Clinton appointments in this administration, and while Obama ran on change, right now he's also establishing some continuity with the past Democratic administration, bringing in some experience once we get to the question of governing.
Sydney, thanks very much. Coming up in the programme, why are all our politicians jumping on the Obama bandwagon? First, a roundup of today's news. Our main story tonight, political leaders have called on the banking industry to pass on today's cut in interest rates to their customers. The Bank of England surprised the city by slashing rates by 1.5%, the biggest reduction for more than a quarter of a century. The base rate now stands at 3%. The chief executive of the body responsible for licensing security guards and bouncers, the Security Industry Authority, has resigned after it was disclosed that some of its own staff had not been properly vetted. Mike Wilson, who was the CEO for just a year, was asked to step down. The authority was also criticised in an independent report for computer problems and mismanagement. A series of attacks from both sides has put the truce between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip under severe strain. On a trip to the Middle East, the American Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, appeared to concede that a peace deal between the Israelis and Palestinians will not be reached by President Bush's deadline of the end of this year. It's been reported that the fragile ceasefire in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been broken. The UN says rebel forces have captured more villages in the east of the country. The attacks came on the eve of an African Union summit in Kenya. And the markets. The FTSE share index closed down steeply by 258 points, as we heard. In New York, the Dow Jones also closed significantly down by 443 points at 8696. A short while ago against the euro, the pound closed slightly down, and against the dollar, the pound also closed down. Well, sometime in the early hours of the morning, we should hear the results of the Glenrothes by-election. Labour is defending a 10,000 majority, although there's no such thing as a safe seat these days. But is Gordon Brown bouncing back? And have the SNP been damaged by the problems of Scottish banks, among other things? Our political editor, Michael Crick, has been in Glenrothes today.
No long queues to vote here, though effectively this is a dual referendum on two different governments. And either way, the result could embarrass someone. Perhaps the neighbouring MP, Gordon Brown, or Alex Salmond, whose SNP were once strong favourites to win this contest. It's widely agreed that the SNP is strongest here in the new town of Glenrothes, at the heart of the much wider Glenrothes constituency. Who did you vote for?
SNP.
And did you think of switching to Labour, or?
No, not at all.
So you've gone from Conservative to Labour to stop the SNP getting in?
Yeah.
And what's the thinking behind that?
It's just I don't ever want to see Scotland independent, and this is just another nail in the coffin if it happens.
Well, what do you think about the way that Labour's been running things and Gordon Brown's performance?
They're bloody awful.
So you're voting Labour, even though you think they're bloody awful, to stop the SNP?
Yeah.
SNP.
SNP?
Yeah.
And what about you?
SNP.
SNP. Did you think of voting for anybody else?
No, I've never voted over here, so it's the first time.
So what, you're English, are you?
Yes.
Right. So what makes you vote SNP?
So what I don't like the government. I don't know.
We get a quick visit from the Lib Dem candidate, whilst workers from the three other main parties are getting on surprisingly well, all equally convinced that Barack Obama's success spells good news for them.
I think it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
So you're all Obama people, are you?
Yes, yes.
Aye. I see you're using the Obama slogan there.
Well,
yes, we can.
Actually, we used the slogan in 1997.
You think that Obama stole it from you?
No, we're reclaiming it.
We can all see who you were supporting.
Why?
In your red scarf.
Yeah, but a red scarf. I've got a blue tie.
Tie with some gold on it.
My underpants are tartan. The SNP claim to have up to 400 workers here today, including their leader, whilst the Labour candidate took tea with one of Mr Salmond's predecessors as First Minister, who'd just flown in from America, where he now teaches.
It's shaping up for a good week, you know. Tuesday night America, Obama sweeps the boards. Glenrothes on Thursday. We're hoping that we get a result this evening. There's no reason why we shouldn't. Campaign's been good, been very focused, good reception, and a good candidate.
Time was when this part of Fife was something of a socialist fortress. Indeed, this village, Leslie, is part of the constituency that just after the war was represented by Willie Gallagher, the only communist MP who ever managed to get re-elected. But tellingly, perhaps, there are some who respect what Gordon Brown's done these past few weeks, but who still voted SNP.
Well, if Barack Obama can be president of America, then there's no reason why he can't have an independent Scotland. Maybe the time's coming, you know.
But, I mean, Gordon Brown is from Fife. How do you think he's done in his year and a half as Prime Minister?
I think Gordon Brown's doing very well, given the circumstances.
I think he's doing a very good job in very difficult circumstances, but at the end of the day he's doing it in Westminster, not at Holyrood, and I'd rather it be done at Holyrood.
Labour timed this contest expecting to lose, but hoping it would be overshadowed by America. Yet then, Mr Brown raised the stakes by becoming the first Prime Minister to visit a by-election twice.
And Michael Crick joins us now. Michael, how's the count going?
Well, it's going pretty well. They're expecting a result here round about 1 o'clock, I think. And the sense I get from going around the polling stations, talking to all the parties here, is that we're probably heading for an SNP victory, another embarrassment, another by-election defeat for Mr Brown. The one Conservative source is saying it could be an SNP majority of about 1,000. Labour is saying, well, if we'd held the by-election a few weeks ago in September, as many people were saying they should have done at the time, then the SNP margin would have been a lot greater. The SNP is saying that they've got their vote out in their good areas around Glenrothes itself, and that Labour have failed to get their vote out in their particularly strong areas in the mining villages that surround the new town.
I hear that Alex Salmond, the Scottish First Minister, is claiming that Barack Obama has got Scottish ancestry. Is that right?
Well, I haven't done the genealogy. I'm sure it's right if Mr Salmond says so, but I suspect a few other countries will be claiming that Obama has got ancestry there as well. It's amusing that everybody's now jumping on the Obama bandwagon. I mean, Mr Salmond's invited him to Scotland. Gordon Brown, of course, was the first leader, as David was saying, to get on the phone to the new president. The Lib Dems are saying that their tax cuts are similar to the kind of tax cuts that Obama is planning to introduce. And of course, the Conservatives say that they are the party of change, just like Obama is. Although, of course, 2 years ago, the chief foreign guest at the Conservative Party conference was John McCain. And it wasn't that long ago that most people in the Brown camp were actually quietly rooting for Hillary Clinton, partly because they knew Hillary Clinton better and they knew all her advisors. How long this will go on, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it depends how long it is before Obama reaches a sticky patch. It'll be amusing to see just whether they're quite so pro-Obama come the time of the next election, probably in the spring of 2010.
OK, we'll leave it there, Michael. Thanks very much, because we want to talk a bit about the Obama effect. We've assembled our political panel: Peter Hyman, former strategist for Tony Blair; Ollie Grenda, the former Lib Dems communication director; and Daniel Finkelstein from The Times and formerly of Conservative Central Office. When I was listening to that, it made me think of Little Britain USA, you know, when the British Prime Minister is all over the American president. What is going on?
Well, it's an attempt to control the political narrative. If you're sitting there at the beginning of the week thinking, how does my political party project itself in the coming week? How do we look like winners? Obviously, you want to try, if you can, to turn, if you're David Cameron, the story into change, and if you're Gordon Brown, you want to change it into the advance of the progressive left. It is a bit preposterous, frankly. I heard about all the West Wing. I think in the West Wing, the British politicians were the commercial break. It's a bit ludicrous, but it's understandable, because what you're trying to do is make yourself look like a winner, and this is the way of doing it.
And Nick Clegg was his former twin, separated at birth, was he?
Well, I think Nick Clegg hasn't exactly said that he's kind of Obama's twin, but what he has said is that a lower income tax is synonymous with what he's been saying. I think there's a danger here for all three, and it's pretty obvious, and it's about comparing apples with pears. And anyone who understands anything about branding, particularly in the commercial sector, would say, to thine own brand be true. And trying to kind of twist anything round, to a suggestion that maybe David Cameron comes from a long line of kind of goat herding Etonians would be a bit preposterous. But I think there is something in there about grabbing onto this, kind of spirit and fizz and excitement and energy that comes in terms of democracy.
He's done a masterclass in politics, hasn't he? That's the key thing.
The thing I found really moving this week, working in a school, is seeing the real impact of Obama. It's actually a bit unseemly, the politicians saying they're like him. What's been really moving is seeing, in some cases, some of my students in tears, particularly the black students, watching videos of his victory speech and actually seeing it as such a symbol, an incredibly powerful symbol of the potential that them growing up, even in this country, not in America, now see that they have. And that's been the real impact. It hasn't been on the corridors of power. It's been the corridors of schools like mine up and down the country.
But there also will be another real impact. I remember that when George Bush was elected, I thought it would be significant, but I totally misjudged why. I thought the significance would be that there'd be a split, really, between the Americans and the British government. Actually, what happened, of course, was that Tony Blair was drawn into this, what turned out to be quite destructive to him, relationship with George Bush. The real politics of Obama when he becomes president, that's when we're going to see what happens to the political party. So what does Gordon Brown do if Barack Obama goes to the left of him and makes New Labour look too right-wing to its own base. What does David Cameron do if Barack Obama seems again to be so to the left of the Conservative Party that it makes David Cameron...
If they're attached, if everybody's attached themselves slavishly to the bandwagon of Obama, and we get into some difficult areas like protectionism, like the economy going further down in the US, and the discussions with Iran and 2 wars being held, there's a difficulty which is attached to Obama right now is probably a good thing. In 8 months, it might not be so great.
But that's why the lessons for here are slightly different. It is about so much a symbol of what he represents, of race in many cases, of a different type of America. And quite a lot of that is peculiar to America, but also resonates in the world. I think drawing too many conclusions for here, as you say, because you can make the case on either side, is it really a case for change, or is it a case for progressive values? I think that's a score draw between the parties.
I think it is a bit of both, and you're quite right. But I do actually think it does show the power of It's Time for a Change as an election campaign theme against It's No Time for a Novice.
Yeah, but the counter, yes, it does. But the counter is still. It's also against the neocon values of Bush.
Absolutely.
And you could say it cuts both ways in the sense that at this time of great insecurity, you need an active government.
How far
and Obama has made the case strongly for active government. Gordon does, obviously, far more than Cameron. So that's the counter.
Not everybody over here can replicate his ability at oratory, for example, but there are quite a few things that the campaign did in terms of getting out voters, communicating with young voters, which was quite extraordinary. Some of the viral advertisements were very funny. I mean, what sort of things have you seen that you think people might pick up here?
Well, I think in particular I was interested in the sense of not going for large-scale funding, but going for small-scale funding from individuals. I mean, I query...
Which is fine if the individuals are prepared to stump up.
And also,
which is where the star quality
where
comes in.
Where I tip into worrying about that is the huge amount of spend. I'm not sure I'm terribly comfortable with that in terms of a democratic process. But I think also what's different between us and the US is simply that, you speak to, I mean, we all have friends in the US, and, they have such a can-do kind of attitude, the yes we can kind of attitude, whereas we all think it's Bob the Builder.
National Party slogan, as we heard.
Probably all had advice also from American people that we paid a lot of money to. It's always absolutely useless because they cannot get it into their heads that
the cynicism of the UK.
That we can't pay for adverts.
No, exactly.
And there's such a different political appetite there.
But Danny, have you had? I mean, every election I've worked in, every campaign, everyone said it's going to be the first internet election, and it never is. Of course, it's always played out on TV and in the newspapers. But Obama's slightly given the sense that might change.
Well, because of turnout, of course. The critical thing in America is you have to pay. You can pay for adverts, and you've got to get your vote to turn out in a way that's different from British general elections. And so I think that's the reason why the internet was very important there, and probably won't be quite as important.
But some of those viral techniques, I think, might...
The thing that could be learned, I think, very much so, is that this first 100 days, this honeymoon, this is the moment for Obama. He has to grab this moment.
Well, he'll never be more popular, will he, at the moment of his inauguration?
I am sure that Peter would be able to advise anybody close to Obama about how you've just got to use that honeymoon moment and
but
get
I would say
right
something different. I was
days.
trying to think of the comparison between 1997 when Tony Blair took over, and when we were in opposition, it didn't always work, but we did a lot of caveats about we can't change things overnight.
What, lowering expectations?
Sure people, His rhetoric by the end was saying we're going to change the world. At one point, he said we're going to make it end rain, and the sunshine's coming when about. I mean, he had no break on that expectations, and my great fear for him is that the expectations now of the world and every American is that he can change everything.
Just to narrow it a little bit, if you were Gordon Brown, you'd want that first-class air ticket to Chicago or wherever as soon as possible, wouldn't you? I mean, he's already made the phone call. You want him out over there.
He doesn't do, of course, first-class air tickets, but he will. He will go out. He will definitely want to. His big narrative is, I'm going to create global governing institutions, and he'll want to use Barack Obama's progressive politics to make the case for active government and to show that he's doing that. I think for really good reasons as well as for electoral ones.
And he's also got, he has got the access because he is the Prime Minister, so therefore, and as diplomats quite often say, the British Prime Minister and American President are fated to get on because it's in the script. Yeah. That's what we expect.
Except that the common agenda this time will be the economy, and it was the economy that was what hinged and the result was spun around and turned on the crisis in the economy, and that is on Gordon Brown's agenda. He would be happily the Chancellor of the Exchequer for the entire universe. He's more comfortable with that than being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
I think the problem for Cameron is he offers the youth, but he doesn't offer the change yet. He's got no change message. And I think if you're comparing the two of them, he has got the time for a change, as in have me, not Gordon, but he hasn't got a change message.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very much. Now, let's have a quick look at the papers. The Guardian has the bank's great gamble, a picture of Mervyn King there on the front page of the Governor in a thoughtful mood. And it also says in the right-hand column, Brown may cut taxes to boost ailing economy, as we discussed earlier with Vince Cable raising that matter. The India has banks ordered to pass on rate cut, interest rates slash. Brown leads the call for homeowners to benefit. And a picture of Rahm Emanuel, the new Chief of Staff at the White House, from West Wing to the real thing, it says. Telegraph have got a very small version here. It says, now cut mortgage rates, lenders told, and Obama lies low as he prepares to tackle financial crisis. The FT has rates fall to 50-year low, and a picture of the Bank of England. And the Mail has shame of the banks as interest rates are slashed by 1.5% to 53-year low. Mortgage giants, yes, even those bailed out by taxpayers, axe their best deals. There we are. That's all from Newsnight tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with more we expect on Obama's key appointments, his first post-election news conference, and John Wilson will be here with Newsnight Review. Good night.
Searching for his ancestral home. Now on BBC Two, we take an emotional journey through modern India with Sanjeev Bhaskar.
They said I'd be travelling in style. They didn't say Indian style.